it. And when it comes to U.S. has been, of course, foremost when it comes to the Ukraine war. They have been in talks, and somehow, well, we're still looking at what the point plan, the peace plan looks like. So far, well, it hasn't been going well with the Europeans. But when it comes to these trade tariffs that has been taking place, it's not just against one country, it's against all. And India has been bearing the brunt of it, mostly, I mean, with 50% tariffs. When we look at that and when we see these bilaterals going forward between Russia and India, even after those tariffs imposed because of buying Russian oil, how do you think U.S. will be looking at that after these bilateral talks?
No, well, the US will not care for it because the way the Americans are repositioning themselves in a multipolar world is they realize that they can't really compete efficiently anymore with China. So what they're looking at is to divide the world into geoeconomic regions. So they would like for countries to then sever themselves off from America's adversaries and then have full loyalty towards the United States. Again, this is the model which they want India to fall into as well. I think they overplayed their hand because once they began to threaten India, and some of the accusations are just ludicrous. I mean, even the idea that the Ukraine is India's war now, I mean, it's very difficult to find even anyone, even some of the most anti-Russian hawks in the West who thinks this makes any sense at all. It's mostly something for the American politicians. But overall, when they pushed the Indians too hard, we saw that India had an alternative. Modi got on a plane and went to China. And I think this is the whole purpose of diversifying economic ties. If America is the only game in town, they can put any pressure they want and India will always have to follow. But as long as India diversifies, I mean, it shouldn't focus excessively on China, excessively on Russia, excessively on the US or Europe. The whole ticket for India should be to diversify. And this is consistent with its non-alignment policy as well. As long as it diversifies economic ties, it has more ability to prosper and there's also more ability to preserve its political autonomy. But as I said, at the moment, this goes against US objectives. They want geoeconomic loyalties. They want to create geoeconomic blocks. And this means that India will have to subordinate itself a bit to American interests. So I think this is what is happening now, which is why I keep telling commentators and politicians in the West as well. It's not that India is aligning in a Russian bloc. It's exactly the opposite they're doing. They're making sure that they have workable ties with all the major powers so they can act as an independent pole of power. This is just common sense.
Right. Because you mentioned that, you know, how America wanted India to align with that's the reason they imposed tariffs. But somehow do you think that has not really done any damage? Because when it comes to relations between Russia and India, they're not really going down especially after this bilateral. And when it comes to even for sanctions and when it comes to peace talks in Russia and Ukraine war, at least till now, it doesn't look like U.S. is trying to get more off Ukraine's side here. They somehow look like, at one point it was called Moscow's wish list. How successful do you think, Trump has been in trying to impose tariffs on India? Just saying that, okay, this is actually supporting war in Ukraine.
Well, much of the American establishment media, as well as the vast majority of the European ones, would like to see the war go on, to continue using Ukrainians to weaken Russia. So the idea that this was Russia's wish list, I think this is an exaggeration. Indeed, as the list initially was produced, it's not acceptable to Russia. Now, the thing is, if this was 3 years ago, the Russians would have made more concessions. But we waited in this proxy war. We kept fighting it now all the way until the point when the Ukrainian army is collapsing. So Russia's in the driver's seat. They're holding all the cards, which means that they don't really have to make any major concessions. Furthermore, they don't really want to make many concessions because the main objective is to make sure that Ukraine does not drift into the NATO orbit, that it can be used as a dagger or a proxy against Russia in the future. So they want to see a neutral Ukraine. But given that especially Europeans keep saying that well, we just need a temporary ceasefire so we can rearm the Ukrainians and essentially see Ukraine as a future partner against Russia. This just, it makes the Russians less likely to make any concessions because they see now territorial conquest as being a key instrument to make sure that Ukraine cannot be used as a proxy against Russia in the future. And this is why it's so damaging. And I know many people use the language that we have to continue helping Ukraine, but the more we threaten to expand NATO, the more we want to use it, we'll try to pull it into the NATO orbit, the more likely Russia will strip it of strategic territory and will essentially wreck what is rest of it.
Right.
Because they see this as an existential threat, and that's what that assessment is what they're acting upon.